Hello and welcome. My name is Tamara Lakomy, and I am the co-founder of Blueprints.org. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank you all for being gathered here today. And I'd like to be honest that I am so honored to stand here amongst you all, for it is for me almost a revolutionary act. Yes. Do not be surprised that I'm using such terms, for it is a revolutionary act for us to be gathered here today after 500 years of oppression and suppression of our identity as Indigenous people. We, the Indigenous, we have fought long and hard for the recognition of our rights, for the recognition of our voice, often standing up to governments that did not represent our needs nor our interests. And that is why it is a very momentous time for us today. We are still revolutionaries. We are still the heirs of the same revolutionaries who yesterday bled for our causes and bled for our liberation. We are still the same heirs of those revolutionaries that yesterday's fight is in today's fight. Yesterday's fight, we fought it with arms, with machetes, with whatever we had, and we lived and we bled for our cause and for recognition. And today's fight is different. Today we fight for economic justice, for our economic emancipation. Today we fight economic warfare, which is often fought against us. Because nowadays, warfare is different. Nowadays, warfare isn't a uniformed army coming in with arms and bayonets. It is not one nation nor a state coming into our territories. It is not a single flag. These are not the people who are coming into our territories to despoil us of our assets and our inheritance. We are fighting against not superior weaponry. We are fighting against superior corporate power. Corporations nowadays are entering into our territories and despoiling us. They are entering into our communities and impoverishing us and dispossessing us. Corporations use superior corporate power to crush us. And that's why I say we need to be united. Today, as revolutionaries, we need to fight for our economic emancipation, to no longer be economic prisoners in a system that does not represent our interests. For we, the Indigenous, we are the richest people in the world. We have lands that are so vastly rich. We are the custodians of lands that have the prime materials that they have been taking out of our lands to build their economies. Our riches have often been our curse. Now we have economic development spoken of as if it's only a development agency that can do it to us, or a state that can do it to us, or an aid organization, as if we, the Indigenous, are not capable of developing ourselves. As if we, the Indigenous, we're not capable of representing our own interests and implementing our own visions. They are reducing us to children dependent on states. They are reducing us to children that need a handout from aid organizations that they also steal from us. We do not need to rely on anyone but ourselves. The onus is on us to represent our assets, to realize that as the Indigenous, we are the custodians and the heirs of all these territories. The onus is on us to package ourselves for investment. The onus is on us to be ready for investment, to show the world the opportunities on our lands. But we can only do so as a collective, to find the right entrepreneurship amongst us, to nurture the right entrepreneurship amongst us, that they may take the visions of our people and make it a reality. because we have our ideas. We do not need other people to develop us. We do not need government agendas to develop us. We can develop ourselves. We don't need somebody else who does not represent us, whatever their ulterior motives are. And what they do, they take all our resources, give us a pittance of a living wage. They put a school there, a road, a Bible. On the other hand, they take everything. We do not need that. What we need is to be empowered. We believe in empowered citizens, empowered indigenous people, replicating the role of government in their own lands. Because we are capable of doing so. And this brings me back to my own story. I am an indigenous Berber. The Berbers are the natives of North Africa. My tribe is called the QUO. And my language, it means they know good people. We are nomadic people going up and down the Sahara Desert. And I myself and my people, we are the product of imperialist policies and failed government initiatives, where our governments took us out of our deserts, out of our tents, and forced us into settlements that became wretched shanty towns. And there, within a few generations, we became hotbeds of the worst types of things. I personally grew up in Islam, called Medellin in Tunisia. That was infamously renowned for sex trafficking, weapon trafficking, and organ trafficking. Because we, the indigenous, intact, we're not worth anything. But we, the indigenous, in spare parts, a heart, a liver, a lung, we're worth a lot. We were the worst for them. We were at the bottom of the food chain. The government did not even recognize us in our constitution. They did not represent our interests nor our needs. So it was easy for us, cut off and severed from our countries, without the means to break out, because the way to break out from poverty normally is through education. And our education system was so abysmal, you could go in and out of school and come out with nothing in your head. As a matter of fact, our teachers radicalized us. When the first waves of fundamentalism entered our countries, we were radicalized. Tunisia is the #1 country exporting jihadists to ISIS. That is currently our biggest export. Why? Look who they are. They are native people. Most indigenous natives form the bulk of ISIS fighters, and nobody seems to focus on that. On the plight of the indigenous who are so dispossessed, that are so hopeless, that feel as if they add nothing to their lives, have nothing to live for. When we were at school, when you would ask a child what you want to be in the West, in the developed country, they'd say, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a fairy, I want to be something. We didn't say that. We said we want to be alive, or if not, we want to be in heaven. At least in heaven we'd be loved by a God who did not consider us another master food. Because the poverty and misery was so abject. But what helped us become more radicalized as indigenous people was the fact that we knew the stories from our grandparents who are nomads. They marauded the deserts and used to say to us, look, over there there's petrol, over there there's oil, there's gas, there's phosphate, there's gold here, look, there's arable land, and look at us, we're naked. Why are we naked? Why is it that our ancestral lands that are rich in everything that we need to build a strong economy, we have no share in it as a people? Why? Who's taking it? We knew that the state is colluding with corporations that would come in and leave nothing for us, the indigenous. That is why, as as blueprints, we believe in a 50-50 reinvestment model, so that we give power back to the indigenous to carve out their own future. Because I believe that ultimately we know how we want to develop ourselves. We don't need the West or white people coming from Harvard working for an oil company to tell us, conscious of their CSR, oh, we want to do something good for you. No, we do not need that. We can represent ourselves. I went to study abroad in Scotland. My mother smuggled me out of the country. And when I went to study in Scotland, I became an archaeologist because I wanted to understand what it means to be indigenous. I wanted to understand why are we so downtrodden. And then it dawned on me, we the indigenous, we are the heirs of people who built civilization so vast and glorious, the West can't get over it and is still figuring it out. Look at the great wonders of architecture that we've left behind. Look at the great legacy of wisdom, knowledge, mathematics, science, chemistry. Look at the wealth of knowledge that we've left behind to the West and have taken it from us. They've commodified our wisdom. They've cheapened it. They've taken it from us and given us no credit. I think they are afraid of us ultimately. They're afraid of the day we may come together as a community, as a collective, and say, we are the heirs of great people. We are the heirs of people who built vast civilizations, and we are still these people. And together we shall create great civilizations again. That is what they fear. When I went to work in East Africa with David Solomon, I went to work with indigenous tribes in South Sudan. And again, I encountered the same formula of oppression, the same trick. I was working with indigenous tribes who were walking around land where oil was seeping through the ground. And yet these people, some of them had gone through the Darfur genocide, they were going through a famine. How can a country be so rich and yet they're going through a famine? And do you know who are the first people to be there? Aid organizations, bands of them, trucks of them. Aid organizations were flocking there with oil companies, ready to feast on a country fresh from its liberation. You see, we need to know how to represent ourselves to the world. We need to have the tools and the know-how to represent ourselves. Which is why as Blueprints we provide indigenous people the access to capital, the access to markets and the know-how, so that they know how to stand up for themselves and deal with people, so that we can create a new status quo. Because ultimately, even when I was working in Uganda, when I was a foreign advisor to the First Lady of Uganda on Indigenous affairs, the indigenous people there were still going through the same thing, the same traumas. They had gold, they had everything, and yet they were poor. Because they did not have state representation, because they did not know how to package themselves up so people would come in and take advantage of them. Which is why the onus is on us to represent our own interests. And do not be afraid of being people with just ideas. For another thing we use against us native people is that, oh, you just have ideas. Ideas are powerful. If you have an idea for development or an idea for a plan to uplift your whole community, the onus is on you to find the right people to implement it, because we have no shortage of entrepreneurship. We have no shortage of business-minded people who can lift us up. If you have an idea, you can find the right people to implement it and turn it into a reality. Because ideas are what spin the wheels of history. Everything around you in this room germinated from a thought, from an idea. And ideas are vastly powerful and potent. Ideas are what create movements, is the mother of inventions. Do not let anyone quell nor quench your ideas. Because ideas can set in motion plans to lift up all our communities. There was once an evil dictator who was so afraid of ideas that he said, we do not let our enemies have guns. Why would we let them have ideas? Who said that? Joseph Stalin. He was afraid of people with ideas. Our ideas are so powerful, but it's also the magic ingredient of success, which is you, the people. You are the magic ingredient of our success. Because now that we're working in Colombia and we're focusing on Nariño, on great and amazing products led and spearheaded by indigenous people, it shows you that the ingenuity and the passion of indigenous people is so vast that when it's their own initiative, when it's them spearheading a movement, then it's successful. When the people have a voice, when they have the determination, when impassioned groups of people take action, you get success. Those who do not believe in the power of people are going against the laws and the facts of history. In Nariño, what's making our projects a success are the people we deal with. Like Kaitarman Kalwasama, an indigenous senator who puts his people first. He has the love and the respect of his people. Wherever he goes, people run up to him to thank him. And I must tell you, that is a marvelous thing for me because I live in London. And I can assure you, If we saw an MP, a member of parliament, if we saw a politician running down the road, the last thing you want to do is go up to them and thank them. As a matter of fact, we want to do something else. Don't get me started what we do in our leaders and So that is why I impress upon you that the right leadership, the right people to represent your needs is crucial. Having the right people to carry in a capsule the vision of your people, and also the right entrepreneurship. That is why I like to thank A&D, Ancestral Development, because they have taken the visions and the dreams of their people and made it into a reality. And that is what we need, us as a people. Because ultimately we are not dreamers living in illusions. We know that we are not here to change the status quo of the corporate world. We are not here to tear it down. We're not there to tear down this behemoth of machinations that they have. We're here to create our own status quo. We're here to create an indigenous business model based on ethics, based on what is equitable and what is just. We're here to create an indigenous model so that when they come to deal with us, they know that they have to deal with us justly, that they have to deal with us equitably, that they can no longer steal from us. And this can only be done through the power of individual collectivism. Through the power of the collective, we will make this happen. Because separated, they will break us down, and they count on that. They count on us being separate. And that's why I always say, I believe in our united America, I believe in our united Africa, because we indigenous people, wherever we are faced the same trials and tribulations. And if we see ourselves as divided by borders, then wrong. We need to create a strong bulwark against them. We need to have the same tools that they've used against us. Because ultimately the tools of capitalism that they have used to de-develop us, to keep us suppressed, are the tools that we can use to develop ourselves. They are the tools that we need to be able to take our vision and make it into a reality. Because ultimately these tools are neutral. What happens in the West now, we hear about ethics in consumerism and ethics in consumption. Why? Because the West knows that they no longer want to be consuming the fruits of our misery and suffering. They know they don't want to be part of this game where they are eating our misery. Because ultimately, us in the third world, we are the ones producing everything that is consumed in the West. Our prime materials are what are keeping the first world going. We are the custodians of these prime materials, and yet the first world are the ones who are building their economies on it. Look at the industrial revolutions in the West. It was funded by the mining in all of America Latina. It was funded by them. So it shows you that we are the ones who are bleeding. We are the ones who are bleeding to sustain them. We are bleeding to sustain the first world and to keep their economies afloat. We are the cogs in the machine, keeping them going. We are the producers. We're the ones broken in the mines. We're the ones broken on the machineries. We are the ones broken in the factories. We are the ones bent in the fields. Our women and children. It is us. We are the ones who are producing. We are the ones sustaining the economies of the first world. And the first world consumers no longer want to be part of that. But they are awakened. They know the game now. And it's up to us now to create our own status quo. Now with the modern tools of technology, now with the modern tools of business, now we know how access to capital and access to markets, now we can stand up to them on an equal footing. Now we can negotiate with them. Now we can allow them to invest into our territories, but no longer as them despoiling us, but as doing equitable trade and what is economically just. We shall not permit it anymore. But we must remember, our strength lies in being a collective. Our strength lies in being united. Our strength lies in realizing that we indigenous people, wherever we are in the world, if our unity is solidified, we will achieve great things because nothing can stop the course of history. Thank you very much.